融聚智慧，方能融创价值。融你我，融无限。江苏银行。
本节目由江苏银行冠名播出。
普惠金融呢，也被称作是包容性金融，是近年来呢被广泛普及的概念之一。由联合国于2005年首次提出，强调呢以可负担的成本，有效的、全方位的使偏远的贫困地区、小微企业和社会低收入人群能够获得价格合理、方便快捷的金融服务。那么，随着全球普惠金融体系的迅速发展呢，投身这一领域研究的学者也不在少数，其中呢就包括了哈佛大学商学院的教授 Michael。就在不久前呢，他受邀在人民大学进行主题为“全球普惠金融前景与展望”的演讲，并在演讲结束之后接受了我们财新时间的专访。Michael 呢出生于中国昆明，成长于乌拉圭，后来呢赴美求学，先后呢就读于达特茅斯学院和哈佛商学院。他曾经担任过全球历史最悠久的小额信贷机构之一，即安信永国际的总裁兼 CEO， 参与过拉美各地一些微型金融银行的建立和治理。2003年7月起呢，他开始在哈佛大学商学院任教，开设全球普惠金融战略领导力课程和全球医疗业务创新课程，聚焦普惠金融在全球各个领域的发展进程。2007年呢 ，Michael 与人合伙创办了风险投资公司 Ignia。这家总部位于墨西哥的公司呢，致力于向低收入群体为服务对象的小微企业提供资金支持，进而改善低收入人群的生活质量。对于普惠金融机构如何平衡服务贫困人口的目标与实现盈利这样一个现实的需求呢 ，Michael 也总结出了不少属于自己的经验。
As we know, Ignia works for the finance project for the low-income class, but it's for profit. If there ever has any conflict, is that we want to make money, but also we want to help the poor as much as we can.
I don't think that making money serving the needs of the poor is a conflict necessarily. In fact, I think what is important when you're trying to serve the poor with basic needs that will help them live closer to the potential of their lives, you need a response that can be really massive, because the people that need it are many. You need also to have an effort that can be sustained through time. And you also need intervention that can get better and better through time. And you also need something that gets cheaper and cheaper through time, so that the best alternative can reach all the people that need it at the lowest cost for those people. And what can deliver that is actually an industry competing to serve the needs of the poor. That is why we at Ignia think that achieving profit is not only desirable but necessary if we're going to have an impact large enough to affect something like poverty, which has so many people involved.
When we're speaking of the inclusive finance, there is a key point, which is risk control. How can we design our credit and risk control system?
Leading microfinance institutions around the world have methodologies that have been able to control risk within the parameters that also allow being profitable. So, for example, Compartamos Banco in Mexico has a loss rate which is close to 1.5% to 2%. Now, how that is done is by doing things very well. In the case of the traditional microfinance institutions, that is being done by knowing the customer very well and having a close relationship between the lending officer and the people that take the loans. However, this is going to change. One of the great things that is happening is that the digital revolution, meaning the ability of machine intelligence to process incredible amounts of data faster and faster and cheaper, married to internet, married to smartphones, is creating a revolution in all our lives. That revolution will also touch financial inclusion. And the promise is that by using all those methods, the ability to interact with low-income people will change dramatically, so that the costs will come down very dramatically, and the ability to determine whether you can repay a loan and benefit from that loan will also be done in very new ways.
And so follow-up question, how would you evaluate the credit system under construction in China currently?
Well, I think China is a leader in applying digital revolution to financial inclusion. So you have many companies from Credit Ease to Ant Financial that are changing the ways in which credit risk is assessed. As you know, in China, one of the big challenges is actually fraud. And the way that a Credit Ease does it is by using the experience that they've built in more than 10 years of business to then develop algorithms that can achieve a good credit result from looking at data that they get from online sources.
Did you see any impressive inclusive finance practiced on public healthcare in China or maybe in other developing countries?
Yes, there's several interesting examples.
For example?
Healthcare in terms of commercial companies that have responded to public healthcare needs. One example is Mexico. In Mexico, the Constitution of the Republic guarantees access to healthcare for its citizens. It's a citizen right to have access to healthcare. However, in practice, what happens when a poor woman has pain in her left side? She needs to go to the public service. And the public healthcare service, she may have to wait 4 hours to see a doctor. And then when she goes to the pharmacy in the public clinic, the Constitution guarantees that she can get her medicine free. But studies show that 82% of the times that pharmacy is out of stock. So as a response to that, there's a company called Farmacias Similares in Mexico that was started by an entrepreneur, which basically put two things together. One is a pharmacy that was the introduction of generic medicine available to the general public. So the medicines were at least 30% cheaper than in other pharmacies, sometimes 75% cheaper. At the same time, right next door, it had clinics where a doctor was available for consultations at $2 the visit. But you had to wait at the most 15 minutes to see the doctor. So actually this became a great solution for the majority of Mexicans. So today, 12 million Mexicans a month buy medicines in Farmacias Similares, and 3.5 million Mexicans a month go to see their doctor in those clinics. It's a very successful company with more than 4,000 units, and it has impacted greatly access to basic healthcare and medicines for Mexicans, and Mexico is a country of 127 million Mexicans. So the fact that 3.5 million Mexicans see the doctor in this pharmacy a month is a large impact for the country as a whole.
P2P 网络借贷一直被视作是推行普惠金融的最主要的渠道之一。那么，自2007年被引入中国以来呢 ，P2P 已经成为了中国互联网金融的重要业态之一，填补了个人与中小企业融资需求的缺口。但是另一方面，高杠杆率、信用评级制度不完善、监管缺失等等因素，也导致了 P2P 市场风险加剧。几大 P2P 平台创始人和高管携巨款出逃的事件，更让人们一度将 P2P 与金融诈骗联系在一起。 的避而远之。2016年的8月份呢，银监会等4部委联合发布了《网络借贷信息中介机构业务活动管理暂行办法》，对网贷行业实施负面清单管理，确立网贷监管体制。而 P2P 行业呢，由此逐渐回归理性的发展路径。对于中国 P2P 行业的发展历程 ，Michael 处又会有着怎样的评价呢
How do you see the recently roller coaster boom and bust of Chinese P2P firms?
Well, P2P is a prime example of an innovation that, because it is so new, the regulators are trying to catch up to regulating it intelligently. So in the process, I think we've seen P2P serious players and P2P players that were fraudulent and that were platforms that were built to deceive people. Unfortunately, this is something that happens when you develop something very new. You can harness the power of something new to do good. You can also use it to deceive people.
In terms of P2P firms, can we draw any lessons from other countries?
I think, in fact, that China leads in that area because I don't know of any P2P market that is as developed as the Chinese one and that handles the volumes that are being handled in China. So this is an opportunity actually for China to develop regulatory frameworks and business models that will be an example for other countries to look at.
In your perspective, what's the main reason for China become kind of the leaders of the P2P market?
Well, I think there have been some really innovative entrepreneurs. That is why I think the history of Creditese is so interesting. And it is a very rich history in which P2P, in my view, was a very creative way to enable lending to a low-income sector within the constraints of the banking system of China when Creditese started. Now, since then, many changes have occurred, and Creditese has evolved with it. But Creditese started, it had the benefit of working with a very large country, the most populous country in the world. So it deployed in a situation that allowed it to get very large numbers. You know, a very small town in China is a very large city in most of the world.
What's the next tipping point for China's finance inclusion business?
I'm not sure that I can answer that with good authority, but I think that certainly some important developments have happened. I understand that the authorities have now mandated banks to have a unit of financial inclusion. I consider that good news and bad news. The good news is that, of course, financial inclusion has become a national priority. The concerning part of that is that if in fact there's now a lot of funds that want to be deployed in financial inclusion, the risk is that it may run ahead of the capability to disperse well. And that creates a risk. The best thing would be that, having established this as a priority, the mechanisms are put in place to quickly develop the capability to deploy well, because that capability needs to grow dramatically in order to absorb the amount of funds coming in. If it's not developed, then there's a risk that we are creating the conditions of a future bubble.
近年来呢，随着中国移动互联网技术水平的显著提升，金融科技与普惠金融的深度融合已经成为了当下的潮流。2016年的杭州 G20 峰会呢，更是将数字普惠金融列为重要的议题之一。数字普惠金融具有服务覆盖广泛化、客户群体大众化、风险管理数据化、交易成本低廉化等等特点，为解决传统普惠金融所面临的小额涉农金融服务的高风险、高成本等问题提供了重大的机遇。
There we have a report which is about fintech adoption index, and China has the highest adoption rate at 69%. So what do you think of the current development of fintech in China, which maybe influences the large inclusive finance market?
China is a leader in...
As a leader again.
Right. And for example, Credit Suisse did an IPO of Dai in the New York Stock Exchange. This has been a signal, a reflection of the leadership of China in this area.
Right now, China has many fintech companies is planning to go abroad to develop their business, such as which was the famous one, Ant Financial. Have you heard about that? Yeah. So, what do you think the futures and the challenges? Any suggestion, advice for those companies?
Well, fintech is an area that is booming around the world. Fintech is also a very wide definition, but it is happening all over the world. For example, at IGNIA, the venture capital fund that I'm associated with in Mexico, more than half of the investments that we have made with the current fund that we're deploying have been in fintech.
You mentioned several times China is the leader for the finance inclusion business, but
in digital finance.
In digital, okay. But maybe you can predict how fast we can go, maybe next 5 years.
Well, I think the next 5 years will be dramatic. I think that what is emerging are the models that will really disrupt existing microfinance models, not only in China, but in the rest of the world. I think China can play a big role in developing that. My own feeling is that within the next 5 years, the new leading models of microfinance and financial inclusion will be developed. China will be one of the sources of that.
There are some observations, and right now Chinese inclusive finance seems to focus on the middle class more than focus on the low-income segments. You think it's good or bad for China?
I think it is a stage which I consider quite normal, because digital technology that is being developed first as logical develops with the segment of the population for which there is more data. But the instruments that are being developed as we're serving the middle class will have an application in order to allow the model to go further and further down. So I think in time, what we are building, I should say what China is building, is the tools and instruments with which to solve some of the great challenges of the industry. One of them being how to reach in an efficient way rural populations.
普惠金融呢，在全球的实践可以追溯到20世纪70年代。以东南亚国家为例，成立于1983年的孟加拉乡村银行，即著名的格莱民银行，通过向穷人提供小额信贷，进而消除贫困。其运作模式呢，目前已经被全球多个国家复制。成立超过100年的印度尼西亚人民银行，拥有印尼最大的小额信贷机构，4000多个网点散布城乡，为超过300万的客户提供贷款。除亚洲以外呢，普惠金融在拉美的墨西哥、巴西，还有非洲的这个肯尼亚等等国家呢，以及发展中国家也得到了广泛的推广，并且成效也是十分的显著。
The other countries in Asia as a whole have been India, which up to recently was the fastest growing microfinance market in the world. Bangladesh, which has at least 3 really good microfinance institutions, and something that is not well known, Indonesia has a Bank Rakyat of Indonesia, which is one of the great giants of microfinance.
We mentioned before some Chinese fintech companies is expanding their business overseas in many different areas, such as Europe and American, and they said their next goal maybe Africa and Latin America. Any suggestions if they're going to go to the Latin American? What's the biggest challenges and opportunities in there?
I think that it is always a challenge
Yeah.
to go into markets that are different from your own. There's advantages. You bring a new eye, you bring a new model, but to succeed, you have to adapt to the local conditions. And that is actually very difficult. When Chinese companies in financial inclusion move into Latin America, they will find some really great institutions already there. The leading microfinance institutions in Latin America are also exploring new models. So what the Chinese companies will have to do is understand the reality of the markets they want to serve in Latin America, which is very different from that of China. And they need to be capable of adapting the model that works in China to whatever needs to be successful in Latin America.
Okay, we talk a lot about the Asian and the Mexico's. How about the United States? What did they do in the recent years?
Well, the United States has a large percentage of the population, which is also relatively unbanked. So there is a potential to serve in the United States. The conditions there are also very particular. And there hasn't been a traditional microfinance type of player that has succeeded in the dimensions of the leading institutions around the world. So in many respects, United States lower income sectors are still waiting for a model that works well. There are many challenges that are unique to the US market, including interest rate caps.
Yeah, maybe you can give more details what the unique challenges for the United States.
Well, the United States has a regulatory environment that was not designed for financing lower income sectors. So for the best of intentions, for example, there are interest rate caps that were developed for other problems, but today serve as a real obstacle to small loans, because the cost of serving small loans as a percentage of the loan is correspondingly much higher.
I'm wondering, has the Occupy Wall Street in some ways accelerate the development of the finance inclusion in the United States?
I don't think so.
Why?
I don't think that the Occupy Wall Street movement has been effective in bringing specific change. I think it is more of an emotional response than an effective change agent. Despite the fact that there have been 3 decades of rising inequality in the United States. So clearly, this is a major problem. But movements like Occupy Wall Street, for me, are not effective ways of bringing about that change.